Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Deep Thought Podcast. So many of you have written in asking about this, and it's a really good question.
Yeah.
The difference between narcissism and avoidant attachment in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And, makes sense, right? They can both cause a lot of heartache and pain,
Mm-hmm.
but to truly heal and move on and find healthier relationships, understanding the difference
Yeah.
is super crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's tricky because on the surface they can look very similar.
Right.
But the motivations behind them are worlds apart.
Exactly. And that's where Jimmy on relationships comes in. We've been digging into his latest video, and he actually cautions against getting too caught up in labels.
Mm-hmm.
He encourages us to focus more on the behaviors and how they impact you.
His point is it doesn't really matter whether we call it narcissism or we call it avoidant attachment. The real question is this relationship serving you?
Right.
Are you feeling respected? Are you feeling valued? Are you feeling cared for? And if not, the label might be less important than recognizing that the relationship itself might not be healthy or sustainable.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about those behaviors. Jimmy points out that both narcissists and avoidant individuals can share some surprising similarities.
Yeah.
Which is probably why so many of you are getting them confused.
Exactly. They both tend to struggle with emotional intimacy and vulnerability.
Right.
They can come across as self-centered, emotionally unavailable, uncomfortable with conflict.
Mm-hmm. They might dismiss your feelings, rarely apologize, and keep conversations pretty superficial.
Yeah.
It's all very surface.
And something that Jimmy highlights that I found really interesting is that both types can leave you feeling like you're doing all the work in the relationship.
Oh, for sure.
You're constantly trying to please them and get their emotional needs met,
Yeah.
while your own needs get totally ignored.
Totally. Okay, so that's a pretty clear picture of the similarities. But where do these two types diverge?
The key difference, as Jimmy explains, lies in their intent.
Okay.
Narcissists are driven by a need for control and power.
Right.
They manipulate and demean others to feel superior. A classic tactic that he talks about is gaslighting.
Oh, yeah?
Which is when the narcissist twists reality to make you question your own sanity or perception of events.
Wow.
It's a very deliberate form of emotional abuse.
That's intense.
Yeah.
So with narcissists, it's very intentional. They're actively trying to manipulate and control the people around them.
Right. It feeds their ego and reinforces their sense of superiority.
Okay.
Avoidants, on the other hand, are motivated by fear.
Okay.
They actually crave connection deep down.
Interesting.
But their past experiences have taught them that getting close to someone is just too risky.
So they create all this distance as a way to protect themselves from getting hurt again.
Exactly. And Jimmy describes this perfectly. He says avoidance will often pull away just when the relationship starts to feel close.
Oh, wow.
Almost as if they can't handle that level of intimacy.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this could be confusing for someone on the receiving end. Both types can withdraw and create distance,
Right.
but for very different reasons.
You're right. And I think this is where it's so crucial to understand those underlying motivations.
Yes.
It's not just about the behavior itself, but the why behind it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how can we start to differentiate between these two types in our own lives? What are some telltale signs that can help us decipher what we're dealing with?
Well, think about love bombing for a second.
Yeah.
It's something Jimmy talks about quite a bit. Initially, both narcissists and avoidants might shower you with attention gifts, affection.
So someone listening might think, wait, my partner did that in the beginning? Does that mean they're a narcissist or avoidant?
Right.
How can we tell the difference?
It's all about the long game.
Okay.
For a narcissist, love bombing is a calculated manipulation tactic. Like setting a trap. They want to hook you in and make you dependent on them.
Right.
And then the control tactics start.
So it's about paying attention to how that initial intensity shifts over time.
Yes.
Does the affection become conditional? Does it start to feel like you have to earn it?
Exactly. And with avoidance, you might experience the initial burst of openness and connection as genuine.
Right.
And it often is. But then as the relationship deepens and they feel more vulnerable, that fear of intimacy kicks in.
So they start to pull away, become distant, even though they might actually be enjoying the relationship.
Yeah.
It must be so frustrating for the other person.
It absolutely can be. Another example Jimmy highlights is how each type handles conflict.
Okay.
Narcissists are all about control, so they see conflict as an opportunity to exert their dominance and belittle you.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're trying to maintain a sense of superiority, conflict is a great way to put the other person down and make yourself feel more powerful.
Precisely. But avoidance, because of their fear of intimacy, will try to avoid conflict at all costs.
Right.
It feels too risky, too emotionally charged.
So while a narcissist might pick a fight, an avoidant might just shut down or walk away.
Yes, and their withdrawal can be just as hurtful as a narcissist's attacks, leaving you feeling dismissed and unimportant.
Right.
Another behavior we need to unpack is the silent treatment.
Oh, yeah, this one is tough to navigate. And Jimmy points out that both types can use it.
Yes.
But again, the motivation is completely different.
For a narcissist, the silent treatment is a weapon, pure and simple. It's a punishment, a way to manipulate you into submission.
It's like they're saying, I'm going to withdraw my love and attention until you do what I want.
Yes, it's about control. But for an avoidant, the silent treatment is more of a coping mechanism.
Okay.
They might genuinely feel overwhelmed by their emotions and need time to process and regulate themselves.
So it's less about trying to hurt you intentionally and more about trying to protect themselves from feeling flooded or engulfed.
Exactly. Jimmy uses a great analogy.
Okay.
He says, imagine an avoidant person as having a smaller emotional cup than someone who's more secure in their attachment style. Their cup fills up quickly, and when it overflows, they need to retreat and create space to process.
Okay, that's a helpful image.
Yeah.
So it's not that they don't care, they just have a lower capacity for handling intense emotions.
Right. And Jimmy emphasizes that this doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does help to understand where it's coming from. It also underscores the importance of having compassion for their struggles, while also setting firm boundaries to protect yourself.
Because ultimately, the silent treatment, regardless of the reason, can be incredibly damaging to a relationship.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another crucial point Jimmy makes.
Okay.
He reminds us that avoidants, even though they struggle with intimacy, often genuinely want a good relationship.
Okay.
They're just afraid of getting hurt.
That makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah.
it's not that they don't care, they just have a different way of showing it.
Exactly. He actually says avoidants tend not to engage in the same kind of manipulative tactics that narcissists use,
Right.
like guilt-tripping, gaslighting, or constantly putting you down.
Interesting. So while a narcissist might intentionally chip away at your self-worth, an avoidant might unintentionally cause you pain through their withdrawal and emotional distance.
That's a really important distinction. It doesn't make their behavior any less hurtful,
Right.
but it does help us understand that their actions might not be coming from a malicious place.
So what's the takeaway here for our listeners who might be struggling with these dynamics in their own relationships? How can we start to navigate these tricky situations?
Well, Jimmy offers some powerful advice, but it might not be what you expect.
Oh.
He doesn't focus on trying to change the other person.
Interesting. Why is that so important? Interesting. Why is that so important?
Because Jimmy believes that if you're fixated on how your partner needs to change, it could be a sign that you're struggling with codependency, anxious attachment, or low self-worth.
So instead of focusing on their behavior, we need to turn the spotlight inward and examine our own patterns and insecurities.
Exactly. And he's very compassionate about this. He says he would never blame anyone for being in this situation.
Right.
But he also emphasizes that we all have a responsibility to ourselves to heal our own wounds and break free from unhealthy relationship dynamics.
That makes sense. It's hard to set healthy boundaries and make empowered choices if we're coming from a place of neediness or insecurity.
Right. And speaking of boundaries, Jimmy is a huge advocate for setting clear and firm boundaries, even if it leads to conflict or even the end of the relationship.
Which can be terrifying, especially if we're afraid of being alone or losing the other person.
Absolutely. But he argues that setting boundaries is essential for protecting our well-being and showing ourselves the respect we deserve. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if your partner isn't willing to respect your boundaries, it's a clear sign that they're not truly interested in a healthy, balanced relationship.
That's a tough pill to swallow. But it's also incredibly empowering to realize that we have the right to walk away from any situation that's not serving us.
You got it. And Jimmy's advice really boils down to this. Do the work on yourself. Start your healing journey. Be assertive about your needs. Communicate your boundaries. And if your partner isn't willing to meet you halfway, have the courage to walk away. You deserve to be with someone who chooses you, who respects you, and who's willing to grow alongside you.
That's such powerful advice. And it applies whether you're dealing with a narcissist, an avoidant, or any other type of unhealthy dynamic.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of our own happiness and well-being and creating relationships that are built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine connection.
Wow, this deep thought has been so insightful and eye-opening. Thank you for joining us today on the Deep Thought Podcast.
It was my pleasure.
If you found this episode helpful, please do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to check out our other podcasts, too. We've got some links below to the sources we mentioned today, along with some additional resources that you might find valuable.
Thanks for listening.
Until next time, keep thinking deeply.